This logic that allegedly either Abrams tanks or F-16s will push Putin to launch a nuclear war, I think it's absurd. Either Russia or anyone else starts a nuclear war, it will be so-called mutual self-assured destruction. So basically, Ukraine is getting enough weapons to survive, but not enough weapons to win. One very absurd restriction is the use of Western weapons on Russian territory. It's impossible to wage a war with this absurd restriction.
Hi everyone, my name is Anastasiia Lapatina and you're watching This Week in Ukraine, a video podcast from the Kyiv Independent. Every week, I sit down with one of my newsroom colleagues to dive into Ukraine's most pressing issues. And this time, we're talking about the F-16 fighter jets, the reasons it's taking so long for Ukraine to receive them, and the unfortunate politics of Western military aid. I'm joined by the Kyiv Independent reporter Oleg Sukhov. Oleg, welcome back to the show.
Glad to be here again.
So on August 20th, just a few days ago, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that Ukraine is finally set to receive 61 much-desired F-16 fighter jets from Denmark and the Netherlands. And the plan is to have these first jets arrive by the end of this year, 2023. So, of course, the countrywide reaction is jubilant. Everyone is really happy. It's a big deal because Ukraine has been asking for these jets for a very, very long time. So, to begin this discussion, just tell us a bit about what's so special about these F-16 fighter jets. Why are they so important? Why do they stand out?
Basically, Ukraine's Air Force consists of very obsolete Soviet aircraft, and Ukraine absolutely needs to replace them because there are few of them, and Ukraine cannot replace them with similar Soviet aircraft because they are produced by Russia, and obviously it's impossible to buy them from Russia. Mm-hmm. And then also it's very hard to find any on the global market, so it definitely needs to replace those jets with Western jets. And F-16s are the most widespread, Western aircraft, Western fighter jet, because there are about 4,000 of them in the world. So it's a big advantage because then Ukraine will be able to increase its fleet of F-16s. There are differences between experts basically on whether F-16s will change the course of the war.
Because the Ukrainian Air Force already said, I think their spokesperson said that it's going to be a game changer and it's going to change the way this war plays out. Is that true?
I think it's sort of partially true. So on the one hand, F-16s are not a magic weapon, so there is a sort of a consensus among experts that F-16s by themselves will not radically change anything. So because basically it's just one minor aspect of the war, and then it will take some time to train Ukrainian pilots, and
it may be too late.
In some ways it is a bit late, because if Ukraine had gotten those F-16s at the beginning of the invasion, they would have had an impact already. But Ukraine definitely needs them anyway, regardless of the time frame, because it will need to have a modern fleet of aircraft, as opposed to this fleet of obsolete Soviet junk that it has now. Ukraine has been asking for F-16 since the very beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022, but the US and other Western countries kept postponing it. So basically, last year, the US said that some of the Ukrainian pilots were being assessed for possible training on F-16 fighter jets, but there were no commitments to supply any jets. And then this year in May, a so-called fighter jet coalition was created when a number of European countries and the United States created sort of a mechanism to train Ukrainian pilots and to supply F-16 fighter jets. And in August, there were like specific commitments to supply specific jets. So it's like the culmination of this trend.
So what are the kind of tasks that F-16 jets can help us accomplish? What can Ukraine do with them?
So basically, first, Ukraine can use F-16s to shoot down Russian missiles. So they would be sort of air defense. So the main sort of use of aircraft like this is to basically is to shoot different missiles and bombs from a large distance.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, and this is very important. So basically, it will just add to Ukraine's capabilities to destroy Russian military targets, specifically aircraft in the occupied territories. So either close to the front line or far from the front line. So basically, Ukraine also hopes to achieve sort of air superiority because currently neither Russia nor Ukraine has air superiority. That's because Russia is afraid of using its aircraft because it knows that they will be shot down by Ukrainian air defense. And Ukraine is also afraid of using its aircraft, obviously, because they're pretty obsolete. There are few of them, and obviously Russian air defense will also shoot them down. So, but the use of F-16s will allow Ukraine to have much better sort of air support during counteroffensives, during any military operations. Although a lot of experts, like for example Michael Kaufman, are saying that it will not have like a sort of a drastic, dramatic impact that some people hope for. So basically, like Ukraine will not be able to use F-16s to destroy Russia's entire air force, or it will not guarantee that Ukraine's counteroffensive will be successful, like by itself. It will not guarantee it, but it will definitely have an impact.
And so, given all that, why did it take so long for the West to finally come to an agreement on this? Because as you've already laid out, of course, weapons deliveries aren't fast ever, but the F-16 negotiations seem just especially long. I mean, we've been asking for them, as you said, from the very beginning. So it's taken more than a year. Why?
So it's connected to basically the West's sort of strategy, overall strategy on weapons supplies.
And what is that?
So the strategy is basically, it's like the West has been supplying weapons very slowly since the very beginning of the invasion, and like sort of piece by piece, as opposed to like fast delivery of everything that it has. So for example, Ukraine needed all kinds of weapons at the beginning of the invasion, but the supplies of sort of necessary weapons started much later. And then only, like for example, last year, HIMARS multiple rocket launches were supplied to Ukraine, and that actually had a big impact on the course of the war.
Right.
But at that time, the West was saying that, okay, HIMARS are okay, but then we can't supply tanks because, so basically, and then this also changed. So, and at the beginning of this year, the West agreed to supply Leopard tanks, Challenger tanks, and Abrams tanks. So, and then after that, the West still kept saying that, okay, tanks are okay, but not F-16s. So, and this game has been continuing for a long time. I think that the main reason for this is this sort of irrational fear of Russia and of so-called escalation. And the West has been coming up with all sorts of sort of absurd excuses. For example, initially they said that, okay, it's we won't supply F-16s because it will take a lot of time. But then...
it did take time.
Yeah, it did take time because the West was delaying it for so long. But even if this argument is sort of taken seriously, then Ukrainian pilots would have been able to use F-16s already if they had started training at the beginning of the invasion.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the logic was that, apparently the West logic was that we're not going to supply too many weapons to Ukraine, hoping that there will be some kind of peace with Putin, some territorial concessions, and everything will be over soon. So now this logic is maybe it's sort of starting to change a bit, but very slowly. And I think one of the fears is this fear of nuclear war. Although I think it's also irrational because it would be suicidal for Putin to launch a nuclear war.
Why do you think that?
Because basically, if either Russia or anyone else starts a nuclear war, it will be so-called mutual self-assured destruction. So there is no point in that, actually, and there's no rational point. And this logic that allegedly either Abrams tanks or F-16s will push Putin to launch a nuclear war, I think it's absurd, because if Putin wants to launch a nuclear war, or if he's so irrational that he's actually able to do that, then he doesn't need such excuses. He can do it anytime he wants for any reason. It's like F-16s and Abrams tanks actually don't affect that. So, and also I think one important point is that the West is still hoping for some kind of deal with Putin, but Russia has shown many times that it's not interested in any kind of peace deal other than Ukraine's complete surrender. So in this case, there is no other alternative but to supplying all the best weapons that the West has, and as quickly as possible. And also, I think that the West's logic is irrational. Because this logic just leads to the continuation of the war indefinitely. So basically, Ukraine is getting enough weapons to survive, but not enough weapons to win.
So basically what you're saying is that this Western logic of not wanting to provoke Putin and not wanting to lead to further escalation, it has clearly failed, because the West has used that logic with so many weapons that it has eventually delivered, and like nothing changed in the way Russia conducts its war. It's as brutal as ever. Obviously no nuclear war happened, nothing happened, despite the West being so afraid of that. But another point that I want to highlight is that, as far as I understand, you're clearly separating the reasons for why these deliveries take so long between the normal and understandable bureaucratic and financial side of it, and like the fact that production may take long, and the political side of it. So you're criticizing the political. You're saying that there isn't enough political will for some of these things to be faster.
Yeah,
is that right?
Yeah, I'm talking about the political side, but the political side also affects the technical side, because basically if there is a will, there is a way. So basically, if the West really wants something, it can speed up production. It can,
pass legislation,
remove bureaucratic hurdles, and do everything it can to speed up supplies. And also, as far as the political side is concerned, one very absurd restriction is the use of Western weapons on Russian territory.
Why is that absurd?
I think it's absolutely moronic, because basically, so it's like Ukraine is not allowed to destroy the weapons that attack it. It's not like no war can be waged like that. So if Russia launches a missile from a Russian facility, then Ukraine obviously has both a moral right to attack it, and practically it's the only solution. To restrict like the use of Western weapons in that way is absurd, I think, because it's just if there's afraid of an escalation, it's basically it's the same sort of the same logic as with the supply of different kinds of weapons.
And as we've mentioned, it fails.
Yeah, it fails. So basically, it doesn't affect anything in the sense that it is not pushing Russia into nuclear war. And it's basically if the West thinks that if, for example, Ukraine starts using Western weapons to attack Russia, and then Russia will somehow escalate the war by either launching a nuclear war or, I don't know, attacking Poland. I think these scenarios are sort of very unrealistic. Because basically, Russia will not attack NATO because it's afraid of its own destruction. Basically, it will be destroyed because NATO is
a much bigger enemy.
Yeah, NATO is much more powerful. If Russia cannot defeat Ukraine, then obviously Russia cannot defeat NATO.
Also, we've already been attacking Russian soil for a very long time now, and nothing changed, right?
Yeah. But their logic is that if Ukrainian weapons attack Russia, then we're not pleased with it, but it's relatively okay. But when Western weapons are used to attack it, then Russia will think that's the West which is to blame, and then it will definitely be pissed off. But it's absurd.
Russia has been saying from the very beginning that it's fighting with NATO. Like, Russia has been accusing NATO of direct involvement since the very beginning of this war. So nothing's going to change, I think, if an American missile flies in.
Yeah, and it's also it's very impractical because it's impossible to wage a war with this absurd restriction. It looks very bizarre when someone hits you and then you're not able to hit him back.
So are there any other important weapons that are in this kind of political limbo that we've been asking for them and they're not being delivered yet?
So one of the main issues now is long-range missiles. So basically, Ukraine has been asking for ATACMS missiles for a long time, and the US has so far refused to supply them. So they have a range of 300 kilometers, and so they can be used to attack targets deep in Russian-occupied territory. I think now there can be no excuses for not giving ATACMS to Ukraine. So Ukraine has already received Storm Shadow missiles from the UK. They are also long-range missiles, and they are very similar to ATACMS. But it would also be very good to have ATACMS too. Apparently there are also political reasons for this, because I don't buy this explanation that it's somehow hard to produce them, or to or that the US has too few of them. This is a solvable issue, I think, and the US is not waging a war right now, so it's probably it's more important for Ukraine to have them. So and then also in February, the US actually promised to supply GLSDB missiles, which have a bit shorter range, but they're also considered long-range weapons. But they still haven't delivered them, allegedly because of some production issues. So they're expected to arrive by the end of this year, as far as I remember. Yeah, but it's not clear yet. But I think it would also be good to have them. So that's the main issue right now.
I mean, it's kind of interesting that most people in Ukraine understand that all of this is just kind of like political will and political weakness of the West. And, some of Ukrainian officials even have said previously that, like, oh, they're saying no to F-16s now, but we all know it's a matter of time. Like, everyone in the government kind of understands that, like, yeah, you guys can say no to this missile or that missile, but, like, we have data from the past to back up the assumption that in 5 months your tone is going to change. But regardless of of the political reasons, all of this must have very real, tangible consequences on the front line in Ukraine. Really tragic consequences, right? Like, just look at the counteroffensive that's going in Ukraine. I mean, we just discussed this in depth in our previous podcast episode with Francis Farrell, where we talked about how the counteroffensive could be going completely differently if we had more weapons and then weapons that we needed, right?
Yeah, so basically, I think, one of the reasons why the counteroffensive has been moving a bit slow, I think it's because Ukraine doesn't have all the necessary weapons. So, I mean, it's not the only reason, I think, but it's still one of the reasons. And if Ukraine had, Western aircraft, if it had ATACMS, it would have much more opportunities for pursuing this counteroffensive. So, and when there are some Western media that say that that some Western officials are sort of are not pleased with the pace of the counteroffensive, it sounds a bit
arrogant.
Arrogant, yeah, because basically, if you didn't give them enough weapons, why are you complaining? So, like. I mean, you can question, the Ukrainian military strategy or something like that, but at least make sure that, Ukraine has all the weapons and then judge the strategy instead of just like basically giving them only a small part of what you can give and then criticizing.
Do you think that this whole situation is going to change at some point? Like, do you think the West will suddenly realize that their fears of escalation are ungrounded and they will speed up? Because, I mean, they have to start noticing that their fear of Russian-led red lines is just not materializing, like, again and again.
Well, I think it is changing already. It has been changing probably since the beginning of the invasion, although it has been changing very slowly. So basically, the West sort of began to realize that those Russian red lines were a fake. And this fear of escalation sort of was mitigated a bit, but it's not gone. So whether it will be gone, I'm not sure. Probably those sort of irrational fears will remain.
We're now going to be moving to some questions that we got from our community members. As always, I'll remind you guys that the Kyiv Independent has its very own membership system, so it's really easy to support us for as little as $5 a month. It only takes a minute. You just have to go to our website at kyivindependent.com/membership. There is an option for a one-time donation and also several tiers for a monthly donation. That way you become a member of our community. And you get really cool perks. You get access, for example, to exclusive events, discussions with editors. You also get access to a Discord server that has all the members of our community and the newsroom, and we try to engage as much as possible there as well. And of course, our favorite perk is that you get to send us in questions before every single episode of the podcast, and we try to incorporate them as much as we can. So the first question that we got, the member is saying that the training of F-16 pilots normally is a very lengthy process. So how likely is it that the Foreign Legion will operate the F-16s with contract pilots?
So about the training of pilots, there are different estimates of how many months it takes to train the Ukrainian pilot. So I've seen estimates from like a couple of months to like years. I think probably the most realistic estimate is that it can be done within like 5 or 6 months. So by the end of this year, maybe by the end of this year, actually, some of the Ukrainian pilots can be trained. And as far as as far as I understood it, it means that some foreign pilots will join the Foreign Legion, right? So basically, this idea has been discussed, and I think it would be a great idea, to hire foreign pilots. But I'm not sure there is political will in the West for it, because again, because of this irrational fear of escalation, the US might not approve this, basically
this initiative.
Because basically the US would probably say that Russia would see those pilots as real NATO pilots, and that would be a great escalation.
But again, they already assume that about our fighters. They genuinely talk about it on their state TV, that they think that Americans and Canadians and whatever the French are fighting for us. So
but as I said, this fear of escalation is irrational, so it cannot be analyzed rationally.
And I mean, I guess the specific situation to which the member is referring is a situation in which we already have the planes, but the training is still ongoing and we don't have the pilots. But I'm not sure if that's a risk, because the training is a lengthy process, but so is the delivery. The delivery of the planes is going to take a very long time as well.
Well, they actually, the Netherlands and Denmark said that they would deliver the planes after the training is completed.
Here you go.
I guess actually this this commentator proposes a solution when basically the West supplies F-16s before training is completed. I think that would be great, but the West hasn't agreed to it.
So another question that we got is, do you fear that the strategy of the West is actually to freeze the conflict in Ukraine and to force Ukraine to negotiate rather than helping Ukraine to win the war once and for all?
Well, the slow delivery of weapons definitely indicates that the West is interested in some kind of peace deal. But so the question is basically whether it's actually possible. And a lot of people in the West, are beginning to realize that Putin will not agree to anything but Ukraine's complete surrender. So,
which means that in turn we will not agree to anything but our victory, because otherwise we're destroyed.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, it's definitely true that a lot of politicians and officials in the West want some kind of peace deal. But even if they want that, even if they push for it, even if Putin agrees to it, Ukraine just may not agree to it.
And it's not agreeing at the moment, right? I mean, I think the recent polls show that more than 90% of Ukrainian citizens do not support concessions to Russia. If the Ukrainian government suddenly flips the narrative and decides to go the other way, I mean, imagine the anger and the and the unrest that can ensue, and that's definitely not something we need in a wartime situation.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, Oleg, thank you so much for being here. It was really interesting to listen to you.
Thank you too.
Also this week, Ukraine's law enforcement conducted hundreds of searches of military enlistment offices and medical commissions across Ukraine, revealing large-scale corruption schemes. Germany's foreign minister defended Ukraine's right to strike targets on Russian soil, saying that Kyiv acts within international law and that the strikes on Moscow are legitimate, Andola news agency reported on August 22nd. And the Ukrainian military reported entering the village of Robotine and advancing south of Malotokmachka in Zaporizhia Oblast. Ukrainian forces also reported liberating 3 square kilometers near Bakhmut over the last week. You can find our show on YouTube and all audio platforms every Friday morning. If you like this episode, please subscribe to us and like our content wherever you're listening to this podcast. Please support the Kyiv Independent so we can keep doing what we do by going to kyivindependent.com/membership and donating to us. And also support us on social media by following our official accounts on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We'll be back next week. Thank you for watching.